So thank you all for making time this morning to come to this press briefing which addresses some very important issues in the power sector. I'll just go ahead and share my screen, my presentation, and take you through the study that we conducted on illegal meters on the national grid, what the implications are, and what the power distributors should be focusing on to address these issues. So we would be looking at the brief background to the study, what's informed the study, what our objectives are, how we conducted the study, what did we find, and what conclusions can we draw from the findings, and what is the way forward by way of recommendations. So we are aware that we have a National Electrification Scheme that is a very key government policy for driving electricity access across the country for economic growth and development. And one of the drivers, the key vehicles to drive that policy has been the Self-Help Electrification Program, which we normally call SHEP. SHEP is a community-driven electrification mechanism that allows communities to be connected to the grid before their scheduled time under the National Electrification Plan. And SHEP has contributed immensely since its introduction in around 1990, where our electricity access was around 23% to 85.17% currently. Now, the requirements or the criteria for qualification to benefit from the SHEP program is that communities have to be within 20 kilometers of an existing 13 kV or 11 kV supply line. They should also be prepared to purchase low voltage poles to have to be connected and have a minimum number that is 30% of the community ready to receive electricity. And the provision of these things have become the key challenge for most communities in accessing the SHEP program. Most communities are unable to purchase the low voltage poles, and also having the critical mass of households in the community being ready to be connected to the grid as well has become a challenge. So as a result, the SHEP meters that have been procured are there, and they find their way outside the jurisdiction or their designated areas for SHEP implementation. And this is something that causes a problem that we have come to know as illegal meter connections. These SHEP meters, because they are there, are taken to beyond the communities that they are supposed to be used in, and people procure them and connect them. They are considered illegal because they have not been processed to enable standardized billing readings as well. The connection is done outside the power distribution system, even though they get to consume. So their consumption essentially is not captured in the grid system, and this leads to losses for the distributors, I should say. In 2020, ECG did revenue exercise in the Ashanti region, and they discovered over 10,000 of these SHEP meters that are operating outside the jurisdiction that they should be operating, and it is not captured by the grid as well. Meanwhile, they are consuming power. This non-payment for power consumed and power thefts through illegal connections are the principal causes of the commercial losses that we've been witnessing in the power distribution sector over the years now. For last year alone, for example, electricity distribution losses for the first quarter of the year was over 26%. And out of this, commercial losses accounted for 16.63%. This total distribution losses is even above the regulatory benchmark that PULC sets for them, which was 22.6% in the last major tariff review. The ECG reports that they estimate these losses to be around $418.2 million annually, or 1.3 million Ghana cedis annually. That's how much we are losing from non-payment for power consumed and power theft from illegal connections in the country. Now, these losses, as they go on, they contribute significantly to the continuous debt accumulation that we've experienced in the power sector, and continue to put the sector into deep financial distress, despite the fact that we introduce the ESLA to clear the energy sector debts. Now, the Energy Sector Recovery Program reports that if this situation is not stemmed quickly, continuous debt accumulation in the sector could reach over $12 billion by 2023. In fact, it is these inefficiencies in collecting revenues and ensuring that people pay for the power that they consume that informed government to decide to use the second compact of the Millennium Challenge Compact for the financial and operational turnaround of ECG through private sector participation. We are all aware of how that process ended. So what we sought to do in this study was to verify the existence of these illegal SHEP meters in the system, because we've been hearing that there's a perception there that it's the SHEP meters that are contributing to the illegal connection menace that the system is facing, and to provide empirical evidence on the problem, and also raise awareness and inform policy decisions for the reform of the sector, as it were. Now, this is how we went about the whole process. And I'm indicating that this is the first phase of this investigation that we have done. The areas that we have done are areas covered by ECG. We intend to proceed to the northern part to look at areas that are covered by NETCO in the coming months. So we randomly selected sampled urban and suburban residential areas in the Ashanti and Greater Accra regions, based on the perception that those are the areas that the illegal SHEP meters are in rampant operation. And this perception is fueled by people who work around the issues of power connection, grid connection in the country. Each meter was captured with the aid of internet-ready cameras, which is then transferred remotely to a central server for analysis. The images contained the exact geographical coordinates and the exact time that the image was captured to ensure the integrity of the data so that someone cannot go and take some meter that's not SHEP meter. Again, to assure the quality and integrity of the data that we got, we cross-reference that data with available data on authorized connections in the areas that these meters were discovered. We also spoke to a number of people in the sector who are very knowledgeable and have experience on the issues of illegal connections and how these operations are carried out in the various areas. Now, the study identified 3,667 illegal connected SHEP meters from the selected urban and suburban residential areas. Again, over 70% of these meters had non-functioning LCD displays. Hence, consumption data could not be accessed. That meant that even if the power distributor can locate these meters, it will be unable to estimate how much power was consumed for retrospective billing. The remaining meters also show very high consumption. So for those ones that the LCD displays are not functioning, they show very high consumption. I should also state that all of these meters that we identified were in use. They were being used by the various households that the meters were identified at. The study also revealed a disturbing phenomenon of what is being called abortion meters. And I'm sure people who work closely with meter connection would have heard this phenomenon. And it explains why the LCD displays on the meters are not functioning. Now, these abortion meters are meters that are deliberately damaged with the application of concentrated heat on the digital displays or the removal of digital components. So there are digital components in these meters that communicates with the grid system, such that when you go and load your credits and you just show your card or the credits count, they remove those systems, all in a bid to erase and prevent record of consumption, especially when it is high. And so they are able to bypass the system and continue to consume power without any accountability for it. Now, we also discovered that agents of the power distributed, which includes subcontractors, service providers, staff who distribute meters among others, actively facilitate and even advise consumers on illegal connection and meter tampering for their private gains. Again, politicians were also discovered in the mix, where they get the SHEP meters from the Ministry of Energy, who procures these meters, to share and connect households to the grid for electoral gains without the active involvement of the power distributors. The result is that people get distributed, they consume the power, but because the power distributors are not involved, the data on the meters are not captured into the grid system for billing purposes. So they consume the power and they don't pay for it. Now, the evidence that we've seen from this work suggests that the numbers of installed SHEP meters identified is only a tip of the iceberg. We suspect that there are more in the system which will require very active monitoring to uncover. Now, the implication of the existence of these meters, like I've already mentioned earlier, is the continuous financial losses to the power distributors. I mean, power distribution is currently estimated at 1.3 million Ghana cedis. Distribution losses, I should say, estimated at 1.3 million Ghana cedis annually for an average cost of 15 Ghana pesos per kilowatt to the consumer. This means that when you buy power and you consume, your charge is 30 pesos per kilowatt hour. Half of that is paying for inefficiencies in the system. Half of that is paying for people who have decided to evade payments, people who have decided to illegally connect to the system and consume the power. And if this continues, there is the risk of these costs going up and up. And we've seen a trajectory of such losses increasing over the years. And it can only get worse if we don't stem the tide quickly. Now, so while we appreciate that the SHEP program has significantly contributed to improving electricity access rates in Ghana, the challenge that it has, which is the inability of communities to meet the minimum requirements, results in SHEP meters finding their way into undesignated locations for illegal connection. And this contributes to the bigger problem of illegally connected meters that we have in the country. The evidence also suggests that this problem is widespread and is brazenly facilitated by agents of the power distributors. These revenue losses from the illegally connected meters puts extra burden on the already financially distressed power sector, which has to be stemmed quickly. Now, the study raises the need for quick reforms, like I mentioned, in addressing this challenge of illegally connected SHEP meters and the wider problem of illegal connection and non-payment for power consumed in the country. We therefore recommend that one, ECG should immediately take steps to regularize all SHEP meters and eliminate the damaged ones. Again, ECG should adopt a whistleblower mechanism to support the detection of illegal connections in the system. We also recommend that ECG should overhaul their monitoring system to ensure that they are able to account for consumption in the system. And particular attention should be paid to the high voltage feeders to enable them to identify where power theft is high in the system. Again, power distributors should monitor their staff and subcontractors in charge of installing and reading meters to identify the recalcitrant ones who are engaged in illegal connections for sanctions. And finally, the Ministry of Energy should ensure that installation of the SHEP meters is made with the active participation of the power distribution companies to ensure they are captured into their system for billing. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your audience. This brings me to the end of my presentation. I think at this point, we can allow some questions for more clarity on the presentation that I just did. So please, if you have some questions, just raise your hands and then allow you to Okay, I see a question here from BK Aklama. Is that to imply that the average Ghanaian is paying twice as much as his or her regular consumption due to the existence of these meters? Well, I use the 30 pesos per kilowatt because that's the lifeline tariff. That's the minimum tariff that can be cost that can be incurred. So that's just for illustration points. That for every kilowatt hour that you consume, I mean, you could be on a higher band of the tariff. 15 pesos per, you are paying 15 pesos per kilowatt for the inefficiencies in the system.
Okay, so can I ask a follow-up question, please?
Yeah, yes.
Great. So, I mean, you mentioned that a major issue is with the politicians also distributing this, and I know, for example, that in part of the Volta region, some politicians have like gone into communities to promise them these political meters, and they don't pay anything on it. Where do the meters come from, and how does the politician get such meters to go and distribute? Can we tackle it from that end as well? What's the suggestion?
Right. So the meters are procured by the Ministry of Energy for ECG for their operations. And that is how some politicians get these meters to be able to use for their electoral gains. Now, one of the recommendations that we gave was that the ministry should ensure that these meters, the connection of these meters, are done with the active participation of ECG. Because the SHEP program is one that is community-based, there has to be mobilization of community members to go and demand for the connection before it gets to them. You can't take away the element of maybe an MP or an assemblyman mobilizing the people to come together to go get the meters. The point here is that once those meters arrive, you should make sure that connection to them is done with the active involvement of ECG to ensure that once they are connecting them, they are capturing the data as well for future billing.
Okay. Yeah, so let me ask a question about the abortion meters you mentioned, and then also the cost that you mentioned. When you talk about abortion meters, is it being done by individual consumers alone, or they're doing it in connection, maybe with the aid of ECG workers or agents of the distributing companies? Now, secondly, also, this higher cost that consumers pay for consumption, how does this impact on businesses, especially those in the manufacturing sector?
Right. So the first one is whether individuals are doing it or alone, or they get help from agents or the distributor. It's a mix. There are people who know these things on their own. Local electricians know how to bypass some of these systems. And there are others also who are actively engaged by the ECG's agents to do these illegal connections and also tampering of the meters that we spoke about, bringing birth to the issue of abortion meters. On the second question, so if we, for every 100 units of power that is delivered, we lose about 26% of it. That cost has to be recovered some way from the system. And it will mean that the responsible people who are ready to pay for power would have to be paying for people who are connecting illegally to the grid, because the cost has to be recovered. I mean, the 15 pesos per kilowatt that I mentioned is just the average of losses per kilowatt hour, and not the entire bill, I should add. Do we have any more questions?
There's one in the chat.
Okay, there's one in the chat. Is there a way for an ordinary person to tell if a meter is illegally connected apart from the non-display LCD? And is there a special channel to report this to you, ACEP, or it has to go to ECG? Secondly, how does this reveal loss from the findings compared to the average depth of ECG? Of what share is this in their standing bets? It's a loaded question. Now, the first part, I think for the new meters that are the prepaid meters, you'll be able to tell, because consumption, you are consuming power, but your credit is not running out. If you move into a rented place where you are consuming power, but your credit is not running out, then, I mean, you should, suspect that there is a problem with the meter, as it were. Now, is there special channel to report this to you, ACEP, or it has to go to ECG? ACEP has its own channels, so you can do both. ACEP has an electricity monitor. You can just go to www.electricitymonitor and report all sorts of power issues that you are facing, power outages, and if there are transformers that are having problems in your area, you can report them, and we also forward them. But you can also report to ECG, and I think ECG's customer service are very responsive these days. If you call them and report to them, they will act on it. Now, how does this revealed loss from the findings compare to the average depth of ECG? Of what share is this in their standing depth? Now, ECG, so the ECG's depth issue is not one that has to do with ECG only as an entity. It's depth that flows along the power value chain. So you've got ECG taking power from Gridco, who also takes it from the generators. Now, if you sell the power, you have to pay back. The cost of the power that you took. But here is the case where out of the power that you take, you lose 26% of it, or of that power, to distribution losses, which is made up of technical and commercial losses. The effect is that you are only able to retain about 70% of the power that you took from the generators and the transmitters. And that's how much you have to recover year on year. So if you don't plug those holes, and you get every year you are losing almost 30% of the power that you are getting, then the debt keeps rising. That's what we talk about, the debt accumulation issues in the power sector. Now, Frederick wants to ask, on the issue of abortion meters, I want to find out that in the course of your study, did you contact the power distributors where such issues have come to their attention, or all these rampant issues are still at their blind side? Well, I think last week, the power planners, ECG and GRIDCO, met the media and the CSO, and the AC, this same issue of illegal meters and the inefficiencies of the management inefficiencies in curbing some of these illegal meter issues was raised. And the boss of ECG indicated that these are issues that they know is happening in the system, and they are going to form a task force to deal with some of these issues. So these are not things that are happening on their blind side. And even in reports from the power sector, these are some of the things that are stated. Illegal connection are stated as some of the challenges. So it's not something that is new to the system. These things have been happening, and they know. And in the past, they have caught some people and sanctioned some people for such illegal connections. Is there another hand?
Okay, Kojo, if there is no more question, because you shared the slide while doing the presentation, for those of us on TV, would need you in a frame like this, just rehashing some of the key points for us so we can have a video of you like this doing it for TV. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so you can just rehash some of your key findings and the recommendations for us.
Now, let's see if there are no more questions first.
Right.
Yeah, maybe that'll be the last thing that I do.
Right, that's fine.
Are there any more questions? Okay, it appears there are no more questions. So, yeah, I have to start from the beginning, right? BK.
Yes, Kojo, sorry, I didn't catch that.
No, but I was asking if I have to start from the beginning.
You don't need to go through everything. You could just summarize. I mean, like you mentioned the number of illegal meters you discovered, what percentage you think it constitutes of the number of illegal meters out there. You discovered that ECG, I mean, power distributors have their agents involved in it and politicians as well. You also mentioned your recommendations. If you could just touch on those two and then the recommendations, I mean, that'll make it brief.
All right, that's fine. So, ACEP, based on the perception about illegal SHEP meters in the system, decided to conduct a study to investigate and verify the existence of these meters in the system to inform policy and also to raise the awareness on the issue in the system. So we set out to randomly sample urban and suburban residential areas in the Ashanti and Greater region based on this perception as well. Now, the key things that we identified, the study identified 3,667 illegally connected SHEP meters from these areas, and over 70% of these meters had non-functioning LCD displays. Hence, their consumption data could not be accessed. And this means that even if the power distributor can locate these meters, it would be unable to estimate how much power was consumed for retrospective billing. The other meters also show very high consumption, with some as high as 28,000 kilowatts. The study also revealed a disturbing phenomenon of what is called abortion meters. And this explains why the LCD displays on the meters are not functioning. Abortion meters are essentially meters that are deliberately damaged with the application of concentrated heat on the digital displays or the removal of the digital components of these meters, which allows them to communicate with the power distributor or the grid system, all in a bid to erase and prevent record of consumption, especially when it is very high. We also uncovered that agents of the power distributors, including the subcontractors, staff, service providers who distribute and install these meters, actively facilitate and in some cases advise consumers on illegal connections and meter tampering for their private gains. We also uncovered that politicians get the SHEP meters from the Ministry of Energy to share and connect households to the grid for electoral gains without the active involvement of the power distributors. So in the end, these people are connected to the system, they consume power, but are not captured for billing purposes. We believe that this is just a tip of the iceberg, and we suspect that there are more in the system. And the implication of all these illegal meters is the further financial losses that the system has to incur. Distribution losses currently in the system is estimated to cost about 1.3 million Ghana cedis annually, with an average cost of about 15 kilowatts, 15 pesos per kilowatt hour to the consumer. And if we don't put an end to this, the cost will keep going on, and we'll have continue to have the debt accumulation problems that we have in the power sector. So there's a need for quick reforms to address this challenge of illegally connected SHEP meters and the wider problem of illegal connections and non-payments for power consumed. So we recommend that one, ECG should immediately take steps to regularize all SHEP meters and eliminate the damaged ones. Secondly, ECG should adopt a whistleblower mechanism to support the detection of illegal connections in the system. We also recommend that ECG should overhaul their monitoring system to ensure that they are able to account for consumption in the system. And particular attention should be paid to the high voltage feeders to enable them to identify where power theft is high. Again, the distributors should monitor their staff and subcontractors in charge of installing and reading meters to identify the recalcitrant ones who are engaged in illegal connection for sanctions. Finally, the Ministry of Energy should ensure that installation of the SHEP meters is made with the active participation of the power distribution companies to ensure they are captured in the system for billing. Hope that's good.
Yes, it works perfect. Thank you.
Great. All right. So yes, you would receive the presentation. You receive the presentation and the paper on which the presentation is based on as well. All right. At this point, I would want to thank all of you for honoring our invitation and coming to listen to this briefing on the prevalence of illegal meters on our national grid. Thank you very much.